Rattlesnake Wells, the Apache Siren's Deadly Midnight Challenge, 1878. The summer sun burned hot over the dusty plains as a small stagecoach creaked along the uneven trail toward Rattlesnake Wells. The town sat alone at the edge of the desert, far from the busy railways and bustling cities of the east. Its wooden buildings were worn by years of harsh wind, scorching sun, and occasional storms that whipped through the plains without mercy. Travelers often spoke of Rattlesnake Wells with a mixture of fear and fascination. Some called it a place of opportunity, where fortunes could be found in gold or cattle. Others whispered about the dangers that lurked in the desert after dark, the kind of dangers that could make even the bravest man hesitate before venturing out. Among the travelers that day was Elias Harper, a young prospector with sun-bleached hair and eyes that reflected both curiosity and determination. He had spent weeks crossing dry, unforgiving plains, following rumors of gold in the canyons near the town. His hands were rough and calloused, evidence of long days digging and panning in streams, but his spirit was undeterred. Beside him rode his horse, a sturdy chestnut with patches of white, loyal and steady, carrying him through the rough terrain. Elias had heard the whispers of Rattlesnake Wells before arriving. Tales of strange disappearances, of travelers vanishing without a trace after nightfall, lingered in his mind like an uneasy shadow. Still, he told himself these were just stories, the kind people told to make the desert seem more terrifying than it was. The first sight of the town was both inviting and unsettling. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their signs swinging gently in the hot breeze. The saloon had chipped paint but seemed busy with rough men laughing loudly, and the general store smelled of leather, coffee, and dry flour. Smoke curled up from a small cookhouse where a few women worked quietly, preparing meals for weary travelers. Despite the signs of life, there was a strange stillness, a sense that the town held its breath, waiting for something unknown. Even the wind felt different here, carrying the faint hiss of rattlesnakes and the scent of sagebrush. Elias could not shake the feeling that he had stepped into a place where the ordinary rules of the world might not apply. As he rode into town, he noticed the sheriff standing near the jailhouse, a tall man with a wide-brimmed hat and a leather vest that had seen better days. Sheriff Calloway was known among travelers as a man who kept order in a place where chaos was common. His eyes, sharp and vigilant, followed Elias in the stagecoach with quiet curiosity. Rumor had it that Calloway had seen more fights, robberies, and mysterious incidents than anyone else in the area. He greeted Elias with a nod but did not offer words, as if measuring the newcomer's courage before speaking. There was a weight to the sheriff's presence, a feeling that he had seen enough of the desert's darkness to recognize it instantly when it appeared. The townspeople themselves were a mixture of hard-working settlers, miners, and travelers passing through. Faces lined with dirt and sunburned skin told stories of long days spent in the unforgiving desert. Some glanced at Elias with suspicion, others with curiosity, but all seemed aware of an unspoken danger lurking nearby. Children ran along the dusty paths, their laughter bright but cautious, as if even they knew to be wary after dark. Horses stamped and whinnied, restless under the heavy sun, while dogs barked and chased shadows across the main street. Everywhere Elias looked, he saw the signs of life that had adapted to hardship, resilience that came from living on the edge of the wilderness. It was in hushed conversations at the saloon and general store that the legend of the Apache Siren came alive. The townspeople spoke of a figure who appeared only at midnight, a mysterious presence in the desert that lured travelers to danger. Some described hearing a strange, haunting whistle on the wind, carried across the plains with a sound that made the hairs on the back of the neck stand up. Others said they had glimpsed a shadowy figure moving silently among the rocks and canyons, always at the edge of vision, disappearing when anyone tried to get closer. No one had seen the Apache Siren up close, yet the fear of its presence was enough to keep people awake at night, locking doors and staying near the safety of the town's few lanterns. Elias, like most outsiders, was skeptical. He listened politely to the stories but dismissed them as exaggerations or tricks to scare newcomers. Still, there was something in the way the townspeople spoke, an edge of fear that did not seem like simple superstition. Some travelers had vanished entirely, leaving only their belongings behind, and even the bravest men hesitated to venture too far into the desert after dark. It was not only the fear of bandits or wild animals. There was something about the night itself that seemed alive, as if the desert watched and waited for those who dared to ignore its warnings. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, Elias walked the main street, taking in the atmosphere. The heat of the day faded, replaced by a cool desert breeze that carried the scent of dry earth and distant pine. Lanterns flickered in the windows, casting long shadows that danced across the dirt road. In the distance, the low howl of coyotes echoed through the canyons, a sound that made the hair on his arms rise. He felt both excited and uneasy, a mix of anticipation and caution. The desert at night was different from the day, quiet yet full of hidden sounds, and Elias sensed that he had entered a place where the ordinary rules no longer applied. As night fell completely, the first incident of what would later be called the Midnight Challenge occurred. A rider, a young man who had come seeking gold, failed to return from the nearby canyons. His horse wandered back alone, restless and frightened, its hooves stirring dust on the empty trail. Whispers spread quickly through the town, and faces that had been relaxed during the day turned pale with worry. Even Sheriff Cowboy, usually calm and composed, frowned as he examined the scene. The disappearance was sudden and mysterious, and no one could explain it. It was as if the desert itself had swallowed the man whole, leaving only a faint trace of disturbance in the sand and rocks. Elias could not ignore the signs any longer. Though he still questioned the reality of the Apache Siren, he began to see that something unusual was happening in the desert around Rattlesnake Wells. The warnings were not just stories told to frighten children. They carried weight, a history of strange events that had shaped the town's people and culture. That night, as he returned to the small boarding house where he was staying, he felt the strange stillness of the desert pressing in. The wind carried the soft hiss of rattlesnakes, the distant call of nocturnal animals, and faintly, a sound that resembled the legendary whistle described in the tales. Elias shivered, realizing that he had stepped into a world where courage and caution were both tested, and where the line between myth and reality was thinner than he had ever imagined. By the time he lay down to rest, the events of the day weighed heavily on his mind. He thought of the missing rider, of the stories whispered in the saloon, and of the silent presence of Sheriff Cowboy, always watching, always alert. Sleep was uneasy, interrupted by dreams of shadowy figures moving in the desert, guiding some travelers to safety and others to peril. Outside, the desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next challenge, the next test of courage for those bold, or foolish, enough to venture too far from the safety of Rattlesnake Wells. In the quiet hours before dawn, Elias realized that the town was not just a place of opportunity. It was a crossroads between human ambition and the wild, untamed power of the desert. Each building, each trail, each cautious glance from the townspeople told a story of survival, fear, and respect for the land. The Apache Siren was not merely a legend to be ignored. It was a symbol of the desert's authority, a reminder that life in this harsh, unforgiving place demanded both courage and humility. And Elias, standing on the threshold of a journey that would test him in ways he could not yet imagine, understood that his arrival in Rattlesnake Wells marked the beginning of a story far greater than simple fortune hunting. It was a story of survival, of respect for the unknown, and of the mysterious forces that shaped life on the edge of the frontier. The morning sun rose over Rattlesnake Wells, casting long golden shadows across the dusty streets. The air was filled with the scent of coffee brewing and freshly baked bread from the small cookhouse at the edge of town. Yet, beneath the ordinary sounds of morning life, there remained an unspoken tension. The previous night's disappearance weighed heavily on the town. Every face seemed etched with worry, every conversation hushed and cautious. Travelers who had once laughed and joked now exchanged wary glances. The legend of the Apache Siren was no longer a distant story. It had become a real possibility in the minds of the townspeople. Elias Harper, having slept little, walked slowly down the main street. He noticed the sheriff standing outside the jailhouse, leaning against the wooden post, eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting something to appear from the desert itself. Sheriff Calloway nodded briefly at Elias, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge shared understanding without words. Elias felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. He had come seeking adventure and gold, yet now, confronted with the reality of the desert's danger, he began to feel the weight of caution pressing on him. As he made his way toward the outskirts of town, Elias passed the general store where the townspeople whispered to one another. Their conversations were half-muted, full of fear and speculation. They spoke of strange tracks near the canyon trails, of a haunting whistle that could be heard just as the sun dipped below the horizon, and of shadows moving across the rocks where no person should be. Each story added to the growing mystery of the Apache Siren, creating a web of fear that even the bravest of men could not ignore. Yet among the stories, Elias sensed fragments of truth, details that made him realize this was no ordinary tale told to frighten newcomers. Determined to understand the legend, Elias sought out Marisol, an elderly Apache woman who lived in a small hut on the edge of the desert. She was known in Rattlesnake Wells as a wise woman, one who held the knowledge of her people and the desert's secrets. Her eyes, dark and sharp, seemed to see beyond what was visible, and her voice carried a calm authority that demanded respect. When Elias approached, she was tending a small fire, preparing herbs and listening to the wind with a focus that suggested she heard more than ordinary sounds. Marisol did not greet Elias with the warmth of hospitality. Instead, she studied him quietly, as though measuring his intentions. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "You have come because of the stories," she said. "The Apache Siren is not a spirit of games. It is a guardian of the land, testing those who enter without respect. Many have come before you thinking the desert is a place to conquer. Few return with understanding." Elias listened intently, feeling a chill as he realized that Marisol's words carried the weight of truth. She continued, describing how the siren appeared only at midnight, guiding travelers through dangers that were often invisible in the dark. Her eyes met his, and he felt an unspoken warning. "The challenges are real," Marisol said. "Those who are arrogant, greedy, or reckless may not survive. Those who listen, who watch, who respect the land, they may learn something the desert wishes to teach." She explained that the siren used clever tricks, shadows, and the natural dangers of the desert to test courage. Rattlesnake Wells itself existed on the edge of sacred land, and the Apache Siren's purpose was to ensure that no one entered with careless disregard. Elias was fascinated, but also unnerved. He realized that the desert was not simply a place to mine gold or hunt for fortune. It was a living, breathing entity with rules that demanded humility. Returning to town, Elias found the townspeople increasingly anxious. News of the missing rider had spread quickly, and fear clung to the streets like dust. Men whispered about the strange tracks they had seen, and women warned their children to stay close to home after dark. Some townsfolk challenged one another to prove bravery, daring each other to follow the faint sounds of the whistle into the canyons. Others barricaded themselves indoors, bolting doors and windows and refusing to venture outside after sunset. Elias observed both reactions with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The desert, it seemed, tested every person in its own way. As the day passed, Elias spent time exploring the edges of the town, studying the desert trails and canyons that stretched into the distance. The terrain was unforgiving, a mix of jagged rocks, sandy paths, and hidden crevices. Cacti and sagebrush grew in clusters, their sharp edges a reminder that even small mistakes could be painful or dangerous. He noticed tracks that were not human, paths where animals had moved silently, and signs of disturbances in the sand that hinted at movement during the night. The desert seemed alive, each element a part of a larger puzzle he was only beginning to understand. By evening, the town took on a different character. Shadows lengthened across the streets, and the wind carried a strange, almost musical whistle that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Horses shivered in their stalls, and even the normally bold children stayed indoors. Elias felt his pulse quicken. The stories Marisol had told him, combined with the events of the previous night, made the legend of the Apache Siren impossible to dismiss. He realized that confronting the desert would require more than courage. It would require sharp observation, respect for the land, and an understanding that danger could be both visible and invisible. Sheriff Calloway, aware of the growing tension, called a meeting at the saloon. The townspeople gathered, voices low and uneasy. He spoke calmly but firmly, reminding them of the known dangers: rattlesnakes, steep cliffs, and the harsh desert terrain. Then he addressed the whispers of the Apache Siren, neither confirming nor denying the legend, but emphasizing caution. "We don't know everything out there," he said, "but we do know that this land is unforgiving. Those who enter it after dark without reason are taking risks that could cost them dearly." His words were practical, yet they carried a weight that resonated with the fears simmering among the crowd. Despite the warnings, a few young men could not resist the lure of adventure. They spoke quietly of following the mysterious whistle, testing their courage, and discovering the truth of the legend for themselves. Elias overheard them, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension rising in his chest. He wondered whether the desert had already claimed more lives than anyone knew, and whether the Apache Siren was merely a story, or something far more powerful, enforcing respect for the land in ways humans could not comprehend. As night fell, the town grew quiet. The wind carried faint sounds from the canyons, distant and strange. Horses whinnied in response, and the few lanterns flickered, as if warning the townsfolk to remain vigilant. Elias returned to a small room in the boarding house, reflecting on Marisol's words and the events of the day. The desert was a place of opportunity, yes, but also a place where pride and recklessness could lead to disaster. He realized that the Apache Siren's challenge was not just a physical test, it was a test of understanding, patience, and humility. In the late hours just before midnight, Elias could hear the faintest whistle drifting across the desert. It was soft, almost musical, yet carried a tone that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. He stared out the window at the darkened canyons, imagining the figure of the siren moving silently among the rocks. He thought of the missing rider, of the cautious townspeople, and of the lessons Marisol had shared. The desert, he realized, had its own rules, and those who ignored them risked more than injury. They risked their very lives. That night, the first signs of the midnight challenge began to appear. Shadows shifted in ways that seemed unnatural, and distant sounds echoed across the canyons. Elias felt a mix of fear and fascination, knowing that the real test was yet to come. He understood that every action, every step into the desert carried consequences. The Apache Siren was not merely a tale, it was a guardian, a reminder that life in Rattlesnake Wells depended on respect, awareness, and courage tempered by wisdom. As he lay awake listening to the sounds of the night, Elias realized that his journey had only just begun. The desert was vast, mysterious, and filled with danger, yet it also offered lessons and insight for those willing to observe and learn. The legend of the Apache Siren had become more than a story. It was a force shaping the town and its people, a challenge waiting to test the bold, and a symbol of the desert's enduring power. Elias knew that when he faced the night's trials, he would be stepping into a world where every choice mattered and where the line between myth and reality could no longer be ignored. The night in Rattlesnake Wells was quiet, yet full of expectation. Lanterns glowed faintly, animals moved cautiously, and the desert seemed to watch. The Apache Siren's presence was felt more strongly than it could ever be seen. And for Elias Harper, the young prospector who had come seeking fortune and adventure, the true meaning of the legend was about to unfold in ways he could never have imagined. The desert night settled over Rattlesnake Wells like a heavy, dark blanket. Stars shimmered faintly in the clear sky, and the wind whispered through the canyons, carrying sounds that could be mistaken for voices if one listened too closely. The town itself was silent, windows were shuttered, doors bolted, and even the usually bold children were asleep, tucked under blankets as their parents muttered warnings about staying inside. Horses snorted softly in the stables, uneasy under the cool night air. It was a night that seemed ordinary at first glance, yet for those who knew the desert it held a strange electric tension, something alive and waiting just beyond the edges of the town.
Elias Harper could not stay indoors.
The events of the previous day and Marisol's warnings weighed heavily on his mind. He knew that the desert was not a place to be underestimated, but the lure of understanding the Apache Siren's challenge proved stronger than his fear. He slipped quietly out of the boarding house, careful not to wake anyone, and made his way toward the edge of town where the desert began to rise into low hills and jagged rocks. The sand was cool beneath his boots, and the wind carried the faint sound of distant rattlesnakes moving among the brush. His heart pounded with anticipation and unease, every shadow and movement amplified by the night's darkness. He was not alone. A small group of young men from the town, each driven by curiosity, courage, or the desire to prove themselves, gathered near the outskirts. They exchanged whispered words and nervous laughter, trying to hide the tremor of fear in their voices. Some carried lanterns, though the light seemed almost laughably weak against the vast darkness of the desert, while others held simple walking sticks or ropes, ill-prepared for the challenges ahead. Sheriff Calloway had warned the town to be cautious, but these young men, fueled by excitement and bravado, decided that the legend of the Apache Siren was a test they could conquer. As the group moved carefully into the desert, the wind shifted. A soft, haunting whistle floated through the canyons, clear yet distant, carrying a tone that was both melodic and chilling. The men froze. Even in their excitement, they felt the weight of its presence. Elias recognized the sound from Marisol's warnings, the beginning of the Siren's midnight challenge. Every step after this would not only test their courage but also their attention to the desert and its dangers. The whistle seemed to move, guiding them along paths that twisted through rocks, sand, and thorny brush. The terrain quickly became treacherous. Jagged rocks jutted from the ground like the teeth of some great beast, and the soft sand shifted underfoot, threatening to cause slips and falls. Cacti and thorn bushes loomed unexpectedly, their sharp spines catching on clothing and skin. Rattlesnakes, disturbed by the movement, hissed and retreated into shadows, unseen but clearly present. Elias realized that the Apache Siren's challenge was not just a test of bravery, it was a test of observation, patience, and respect. One misstep could result in serious injury or worse. The desert was a cunning adversary, using natural hazards as a part of its challenge. As they ventured deeper, the whistle grew louder, more insistent. Shadows danced across the canyon walls, moving in ways that seemed almost unnatural. Elias and the others began to see shapes that resembled figures in the distance, just beyond the reach of their lanterns. Some of the men whispered of seeing someone, or something, moving between rocks, always staying just out of reach. Fear began to creep in, mingling with the excitement, and one by one the men faltered. A slip on loose rock here, a startled horse there, and the group began to fragment. Those who hesitated or looked away risked losing their way entirely. The desert seemed alive, shifting and responding to their movements, testing not just courage but focus and respect for its hidden dangers. Elias pressed on, moving with caution, watching the shadows and listening to the subtle sounds of the night. He realized that panic was the greatest enemy. The whistle, the shadows, the rattlesnakes, they were not supernatural. They were tests, designed to measure his awareness and respect for the desert. The legend of the Apache Siren, he understood, was rooted in both myth and practicality. It kept the reckless away from sacred or dangerous lands while teaching valuable lessons to those who survived. Yet the challenge remained deadly, and he could see its effects clearly. Two of the young men, too eager to follow blindly, had vanished into the darkness, leaving only the faintest traces of disturbed sand. The desert had claimed them, at least temporarily, as it had many before. Hours seemed to pass in the slow crawl of the night. Elias followed the winding paths, moving carefully, using the whistle as both a guide and a warning. The desert whispered constantly, every sound amplified in the stillness, the scrape of rocks underfoot, the hiss of a distant snake, the faint rustle of small animals hiding in the brush. At one point, Elias stumbled across an old ravine, its edge hidden in the darkness. He froze, realizing that a single misstep could send him tumbling into jagged rocks below. The other men had fallen behind, their confidence shaken by the natural obstacles. In that moment, Elias understood what Marisol had meant. The Apache Siren tested not only courage but patience, awareness, and humility. The desert required respect. Suddenly, he heard a different sound, a soft, deliberate movement ahead, faster and more purposeful than the wind. He raised his lantern cautiously and saw, for the first time, a figure moving among the rocks. It was swift, almost fluid, yet clearly human. Elias stopped, unsure whether to approach or retreat. The figure paused, turned slightly, and disappeared into the shadows again. He realized that the Apache Siren, if it were indeed a person rather than a spirit, was skilled and cunning, using the night and the desert itself to maintain control over the challenge. Fear mixed with admiration in Elias's chest. Whoever the siren was, they commanded respect, and every choice he made from this point forward could determine whether he survived the night. As he continued, the landscape grew more difficult. Loose stones shifted underfoot, thorny plants snagged clothing and skin, and the wind carried whispers that seemed almost like voices. Elias kept his focus, remembering Marisol's words: observe, respect, and move with caution. The path twisted unpredictably, testing not only his endurance but his mind. Each shadow could hide danger. Each sound could indicate a hazard. He understood that the Apache Siren's challenge was as much about strategy and awareness as it was about bravery. Those who rushed or acted recklessly would be the first to falter. Near the deepest part of the canyon, Elias paused to rest briefly. The silence around him was broken only by the distant whistle, now softer, almost teasing. He thought about the men who had ventured before him, the ones who had disappeared or returned frightened and humbled. He realized that the desert taught lessons in subtle ways, through fear, through danger, through observation. Every step he had taken was a part of that lesson. He felt both anxiety and respect, knowing that the Apache Siren's test was designed not to punish unnecessarily, but to teach the importance of humility, awareness, and courage. Hours into the night, Elias began to notice patterns in the shadows and movements. The whistle seemed to respond to his own choices, guiding him away from danger and toward safe passages. It was as if the challenge was alive, adjusting to his actions, rewarding careful observation and punishing recklessness. He thought of Marisol and her warnings, and a sense of clarity began to form in his mind. The legend of the Apache Siren was not merely a tale to frighten travelers. It was a story built from real lessons of survival, cleverness, and respect for the harsh desert environment. By the time the first hints of dawn began to touch the horizon, Elias emerged from the canyon, exhausted but unharmed. His heart still pounded from the night's trials, but he felt a new sense of understanding. He had faced the Apache Siren's challenge without panicking, without ignoring the dangers, and without underestimating the desert. The experience left him humbled and alert, aware of both his own limitations and the power of the land around him. The other men who had ventured into the desert that night had not fared as well, scattered or lost along the way. Elias realized that bravery alone was not enough. It must be paired with respect, caution, and awareness to survive the midnight challenge. When he returned to Rattlesnake Wells, the town was beginning to stir with the morning light. Lanterns were extinguished, animals were fed, and the townspeople slowly emerged, sharing wary greetings. Sheriff Calloway greeted Elias with a nod, his eyes conveying a quiet approval. The young prospector had survived, but he knew that the desert had left its mark, teaching lessons that could not be ignored. The legend of the Apache Siren, for those who had witnessed the night, was no longer just a story. It was a living, breathing challenge, a symbol of the desert's power and the wisdom required to navigate it safely. Elias spent the rest of the day recovering, reflecting on what he had experienced. Every detail, the whistle, the shifting shadows, the hidden dangers, was a lesson that he would carry with him. He thought about the other men who had faltered, about the missing rider from days before, and about the wisdom of those like Marisol who understood the desert's secrets. The Apache Siren was not a threat born of malice. It was a guardian, a test, a reminder that the desert demanded respect and understanding. That night, as he drifted into sleep, Elias knew that the story of the Midnight Challenge was far from over. The desert held many more mysteries, and the Apache Siren's presence would continue to shape the lives of anyone daring enough to venture into its depths. He understood now that the challenge was not simply about survival. It was about learning, humility, and the awareness that life in Rattlesnake Wells depended on careful observation, courage tempered by wisdom, and the respect owed to a land both beautiful and unforgiving. The desert morning was calm, almost eerily so, as Elias Harper made his way back into the canyons. He had survived the Midnight Challenge, but questions still burned in his mind. Who or what was the Apache Siren? Was it truly a spirit as the legend suggested, or something else entirely? The previous night had tested his courage, observation, and patience, but the answers he sought required confronting the mystery directly. Determined, he returned to the edges of the canyon where the whispers and shadows seemed strongest, knowing that understanding the siren meant stepping into the unknown once more. As Elias walked, the canyon walls rose steeply on either side, casting long, twisting shadows. The wind carried the faintest sound of the whistle, almost like a song drifting between the rocks. Every step he took was measured, careful, and deliberate. He recalled Marisol's warnings. The Apache Siren was not a spirit of anger, but a guardian, a teacher who tested those who entered sacred land without respect. Elias's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and excitement. He knew the siren was near, and that his actions in the coming moments would determine what he would learn, and whether he would survive. Hours passed in careful movement. Elias noticed patterns in the shadows and the paths that opened before him. Rocks and sand shifted subtly, as though guiding him along safe passages, while discouraging reckless choices. The desert, he realized, was a silent partner in the siren's challenge, its natural obstacles carefully aligned with the tests she created. Then, suddenly, movement caught his eye. A figure gliding between boulders with the speed and grace of someone who knew the terrain intimately. Elias froze, unsure whether to call out or stay hidden. The figure paused and turned slightly, revealing the outline of a young woman. Her movements were fluid, almost silent, and she wore simple clothing that allowed her to move easily across the rocky landscape. Her dark hair caught the faint light of the rising sun, and her eyes, sharp and alert, seemed to see Elias before he even moved. For a moment he believed he had stumbled upon the legendary Apache Siren herself. The stories of a ghostly figure or spirit faded in the light of reality. Here was a real person, living and breathing, yet capable of inspiring fear through skill and cunning. Elias raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm.
I'm Elias Harper, he said carefully, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I came to understand.
To see the truth about the Apache Siren. The woman's eyes studied him intently. There was no immediate reply, only a tense silence that carried the weight of the desert around them. Then she spoke, her voice low but confident. Many have come here seeking adventure, gold, or glory. Few come to learn, and fewer still understand what the desert demands. Why should I show you the truth? Elias felt a mixture of awe and respect. He lowered his gaze slightly, understanding that arrogance would gain him nothing. Because I want to respect this land, he said honestly. Because I've seen what can happen when people act without care. I want to survive, yes, but I also want to learn. The woman considered his words, her gaze sharp as she weighed his sincerity. Finally, she nodded slightly. Then follow me. But know this. The desert teaches through danger and observation. What you see may challenge what you believe. For hours, she guided Elias through hidden paths in the canyons, teaching him to watch for subtle signs, the scratch of a lizard on a rock, the disturbed sand where small animals had moved, the whisper of wind that indicated hidden ravines. Every step was a lesson, every movement a test of his attention and humility. The young woman was not cruel, but she was precise, using the environment itself to reinforce her teachings. Elias began to understand that the Apache Siren's challenge was not punishment. It was a careful way to ensure that those who entered the desert did so with respect and awareness. At one point, Elias almost stepped into a hidden pit,
covered only by loose branches and sand.
The woman's soft warning saved him just in time. He realized that the danger had been invisible until the right moment, a deliberate part of the challenge.
"This is why the stories say the siren appears," she explained. "It is not to frighten without reason.
It is to protect the land and those who might not understand its rules." Elias nodded, his respect growing with each passing moment. The lessons were clear. Courage alone was not enough. Observation, patience, and humility were equally important. As they moved deeper into the canyon, she shared stories of the land's sacred nature, of her people's connection to the desert, and of the responsibilities that came with knowing its secrets. She spoke of generations who had survived by understanding the patterns of the wind, the paths of animals, and the signs left by the desert itself. Elias listened intently, realizing that the Apache Siren was not a myth designed to frighten. It was a person with purpose, a guardian ensuring that the land was respected and that reckless travelers were taught valuable lessons. The more Elias observed, the more he noticed subtle signs that had gone unnoticed before. Patterns in the rocks that marked safe passages, marks on the sand indicating hidden dangers, and faint trails that guided travelers through treacherous areas. The woman moved with ease and certainty, showing a mastery of the land that Elias could only admire. He understood why the stories of the Apache Siren inspired fear. It was not supernatural power but skill, knowledge, and an intimate connection with the desert that made her presence so commanding. At the canyon's edge, she paused and turned to face him. "You have learned much tonight," she said. "You have observed, you have respected, and you have survived. But remember this, the desert does not forgive arrogance. Those who enter without respect will face its lessons, whether you see them or not." Elias nodded solemnly. He felt a profound sense of humility and gratitude, understanding that his journey had changed him. The Apache Siren was no longer a legend to fear blindly. He was a teacher, a guardian, and a reminder of the desert's power and wisdom. As the sun began to rise fully, bathing the canyons in warm light, Elias realized that he had not only faced the challenge but had also gained understanding. The missing riders and scattered travelers were not victims of supernatural forces. They had simply underestimated the desert and failed to recognize its lessons. He now understood the importance of caution, awareness, and respect. The desert demanded more than bravery. It demanded wisdom and humility, qualities that only experience and careful observation could teach. Before departing, the woman handed Elias a small, smooth stone worn by wind and sand. "Remember this," she said. "It is a symbol of the desert's lessons. Carry it with you and let it remind you of what you have learned. The Apache Siren is not a force of harm, but of guidance. Respect this land, and it may guide you safely. Ignore it, and it will teach you in ways you may not survive." Elias took the stone carefully, understanding the weight of her words. It was a small token, yet it carried a profound meaning, a reminder of the desert's power and the lessons he had earned. The journey back to Rattlesnake Wells was quiet. Elias reflected on everything he had experienced: the midnight challenge, the dangers of the desert, and the wisdom of the woman known as the Apache Siren. He realized that the true challenge had not been about fear or superstition, but about understanding, patience, and respect for the land. Every step he had taken, every choice he had made, had been part of a larger lesson about survival, awareness, and humility. When he returned to the town, the streets were starting to fill with morning activity. Sheriff Cowboy greeted him quietly, recognizing the change in Elias's demeanor. He had returned not only alive, but also wiser, carrying with him a story that would shape his understanding of the desert and the challenges it held. The townspeople watched with a mixture of curiosity and respect, sensing that Elias had encountered something extraordinary. Yet, he knew the truth. It was not magic or spirits that had guided him, but skill, knowledge, and the wisdom of the Apache Siren. By the end of the day, Elias felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had faced fear, learned humility, and discovered the true nature of the Midnight Challenge. The desert had tested him, but it had also taught him, guiding him safely through danger while reinforcing the lessons of respect and awareness. He knew that the Apache Siren would remain a figure of mystery for many, Yet he carried the truth with him. A truth built on observation, courage, and understanding, not superstition.
As night approached once more, Elias looked toward the canyons with a sense of reverence.
He knew that the lessons were ongoing, that the desert's challenges would continue for those willing to test themselves. Yet he also knew that he had grown stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the land than most travelers ever would. The Apache Siren, a guardian of sacred ground, had revealed her purpose, not to frighten, but to teach, and to ensure that only those who approached with respect and understanding could navigate the dangers of Rattlesnake Wells safely. And so, Elias Harper became more than a prospector seeking fortune. He became a student of the desert, a man who had faced fear and emerged wiser. The Apache Siren remained a mystery to others, but to Elias, she was a teacher whose lessons would guide him for the rest of his life. The midnight challenge had ended, yet its impact would echo in his mind forever, a reminder of the desert's power, the wisdom of those who know it, and the courage required to walk among its shadows. The sun rose slowly over Rattlesnake Wells, casting a warm golden light across the dusty streets and wooden buildings. The town was waking from the quiet of dawn, yet the events of the past nights had left an invisible mark on everyone. Travelers who had once dismissed the legends of the Apache Siren now spoke in hushed tones, their voices tinged with a mixture of fear, respect, and curiosity. The desert, with its vast stretches of sand, rocks, and canyons, had reminded them all that it was not to be underestimated. Elias Harper returned to town, carrying with him the knowledge and lessons he had gained from the midnight challenge. His steps were measured, his posture calm but alert, and his eyes carried a quiet confidence that came from experience. People noticed the change immediately. Those who had been skeptical now approached him with questions, eager to hear about what he had seen, what he had learned, and whether the legendary Apache Siren was real. Elias, however, was careful with his words. He knew that many were not ready to fully understand the truth. Some needed the legend to remain mysterious, a tale to inspire caution and respect. In the saloon, a small crowd gathered as Elias recounted the night's events, carefully describing the dangers of the desert and the lessons of observation, patience, and humility. He told them about the hidden paths, the shifting sand, and the subtle signs that could mean the difference between safety and disaster. He spoke of the faint whistle, the shadows, and the presence of someone moving with skill and purpose among the rocks. Yet he did not reveal everything. Some truths were sacred, meant to be understood only by those who approached the land with genuine respect. Still, his story impressed the townspeople, who listened with rapt attention, realizing that the legend of the Apache Siren was not just a tale to frighten newcomers, but a reflection of the desert's power and wisdom. Sheriff Calloway observed quietly, his face thoughtful. He had known the dangers of the desert and the stories of the siren for years, but seeing Elias return safely with knowledge and humility reassured him. The sheriff understood that the legend served an important purpose. It protected the town and its surroundings by encouraging travelers to respect the land and to recognize that the desert was more than just a place for fortune and adventure. He nodded slightly to Elias, silently acknowledging the young man's growth and the courage he had shown. Elias spent the next few days walking the trails, observing the desert, and reflecting on his experiences. He noticed the patterns Marisol had taught him, the subtle tracks of animals, the hidden ravines, and the signs of water or shelter that could be life-saving in the harsh environment. The desert was no longer an enemy to fear blindly. It had become a teacher, revealing its lessons to those willing to learn. He also understood the role of the Apache Siren. She was not a spirit, nor was she there to harm the town. She was a guardian, ensuring that those who entered sacred lands did so with care, respect, and awareness. Her challenge had been designed to teach, not punish, and Elias felt gratitude for the lessons he had learned. Word of his experience spread beyond the town, reaching other settlements and travelers. Some came to Rattlesnake Wells out of curiosity, eager to witness the legendary desert and to see if the stories of the Apache Siren were true. Others came seeking adventure, hoping to test their courage against the midnight challenge. Elias warned them, sharing his knowledge while emphasizing respect and caution. He told them that the desert demanded observation, humility, and patience. Those who ignored these lessons risked serious consequences, while those who listened and watched carefully could learn much from its hidden signs and challenges. As more people came, the legend of the Apache Siren grew, evolving from a simple story into a symbol of the desert's power and wisdom. Rattlesnake Wells became known not only as a place where fortune could be found, but also as a place where courage, observation, and respect for the land were tested. Travelers shared their experiences in whispers and letters, describing the eerie whistle in the night, the shadowy figure moving through the rocks, and the hidden dangers that could challenge even the bravest adventurers. Over time, the town developed a cautious reputation, attracting those who were prepared to face the desert with humility and discouraging those who sought only recklessness or greed. Elias often returned to the canyons not out of desire for danger, but out of curiosity and respect. He would watch the desert, noting changes in the terrain, patterns of wildlife, and subtle signs that might indicate hidden paths or dangers. Occasionally, he would catch a glimpse of the Apache Siren, moving silently and purposefully, a reminder that the desert's lessons were ongoing and that the guardian remained vigilant. These moments reinforced his understanding that the challenge was not a one-time test, but a continuous opportunity to observe, learn, and grow. Marisol occasionally visited Elias, offering guidance and wisdom about the desert and the traditions of her people. She reminded him that knowledge was a gift, one that required humility and responsibility. "The desert does not forgive carelessness," she said. "It teaches those who listen, but it tests those who do not. Remember that what you have learned is precious, and share it carefully so others may survive and grow as you have."
Elias listened, understanding that the story of the Apache Siren was larger than a legend. It was a way of teaching, protecting, and connecting people with the land.
As the years passed, Rattlesnake Wells continued to grow, but the legend of the Apache Siren never faded. Travelers and townspeople alike respected the boundaries of the desert and approached it with a mixture of awe and caution. Stories of the Midnight Challenge were passed down through generations, each retelling emphasizing not only the dangers, but also the lessons of awareness, humility, and observation. The desert remained a place of opportunity, adventure, and risk. Yet those who understood the siren's lessons knew that respect and wisdom were just as important as courage. Elias Harper became a respected figure in the town, known for his knowledge of the desert and his ability to guide others safely through its challenges. He shared stories of the Midnight Challenge, emphasizing the importance of careful observation and humility. Travelers listened intently, realizing that survival in Rattlesnake Wells depended not only on skill or bravery but also on an understanding of the land and the lessons it offered. Over time, Elias's experiences and teachings became part of the town's culture, ensuring that the wisdom of the Apache Siren would continue to protect and guide those who ventured into the desert. The legend of the Apache Siren endured, growing in mystique and respect. Some spoke of her as a shadow moving silently among the rocks, others as a teacher whose presence ensured that travelers approached the desert wisely. Yet for those who had learned the truth, she was more than a figure of fear. She was a guardian, a teacher, and a reminder that the desert was alive with lessons for those willing to observe. The Midnight Challenge remained, a test for the curious and the brave, but one that carried the promise of learning and growth for those who approached with respect. Even decades later, travelers would speak of the whistle that drifted through the desert at night, the shadows that seemed to move with purpose, and the lessons that awaited those willing to face the challenge. The story of Elias Harper and his encounter with the Apache Siren became a symbol of the frontier spirit. Courage tempered by humility, curiosity guided by wisdom, and respect for forces larger than oneself. Rattlesnake Wells remained a place of history, mystery, and adventure, shaped by the lessons of the desert and the silent guardian who ensured that those who entered it understood both the dangers and the rewards. In the end, the Apache Siren's challenge was not just a test of bravery. It was a story of learning, respect, and connection with the land. Elias Harper carried the lessons with him for the rest of his life, sharing them carefully and thoughtfully, ensuring that the wisdom of the desert would continue to guide those who dared to venture into its shadows. The town of Rattlesnake Wells, forever marked by the Midnight Challenge, became a place where courage, awareness, and humility were valued as much as gold and opportunity. The desert, with all its hidden dangers and secret paths, remained a teacher, and the Apache Siren remained its vigilant guardian. And so, the legend lived on, not as a tale to frighten, but as a story to guide, protect, and inspire. Those who heard the soft, haunting whistle of the night knew that the desert had not forgotten them, and that the Apache Siren was always there, watching, teaching, and reminding all who entered Rattlesnake Wells of the true meaning of courage, respect, and understanding.